Hi guys, welcome back to Qigong Project. I'm Robert Coons. So in the last video, we talked about the relationship between internal alchemy documents and modern Qigong. And more specifically, we talked about how Wang Dongting's maybe early 20th century text about putting the attention outside the body, outside of the eyes when you meditate, has some relationship with Pang Ming's Zhina and Qigong external Hunyuan system, even though maybe Pang did or didn't read the document, right? These ideas from Taoism certainly filtered into his system. So in this video, I thought what we would do instead is talk a little bit more about internal alchemy and the idea of the mind existing outside the body. This is going to be a little bit more of an internal alchemy topic rather than an internal alchemy and Qigong topic, but I trust that if you, number one, understand internal alchemy concepts better, you'll be able to apply them in Qigong better. And number two, maybe you're interested in the internal alchemy meditation system. It's a pretty great system. Incidentally, Wang Dongting, the author of the document that we were discussing last time and that we're going to be discussing this time, the Jiao Wai Biechuan, right, the sort of an extra transmission that he added on to his previously existing teachings toward the end of his life, was part of the Western school of internal alchemy, which was founded in the 19th century, so in the 1800s, by Li Hanshu, a very famous figure in Taoism, or the three teachings approach of combining Taoism, Buddhism, and Confucianism. The Western school is a very interesting school, and if you're interested in it, I've put a link in the bottom of this video where you can take a course about Western school internal alchemy that I gave, if you're interested in that kind of thing. Okay, so in terms of how this document understands things, right? The breakdown of the theory of Taoism is basically identical to every other Neidan document published during this period of time. So Neidan documents have a history dating back, I don't know, like maybe 1300 years approximately. It's really hard to say when the tradition started. People give representative figures who are often semi-mythological, like Lu Dongbian and Han Zhongli, as the founders of Neidan, but we're really, it's been around for a long time and it's been developing, and different people have added to it over the years. You can make a reading of the internal alchemy school and find many of the same ideas throughout its entire history, but really each different generation has its own flavor. And so internal alchemy as a practice really becomes mature from the 1500s forward. Okay, so arriving at today, it's a very mature school of meditation in China, although it's not particularly well understood outside of China, and arguably there's a relatively smaller number of people in China that practice internal alchemy than, let's say, various Buddhist schools like Chan. So nonetheless, this document, even though its principles are based on the idea of absolute stillness leading to activity, emptiness leading to movement, etc., it still has some interesting features that it emphasizes. So one of the things you'll find a lot is that internal alchemy documents tend to emphasize the parts of practice that the masters who created those schools of thought or advanced them tended to agree with, and de-emphasize aspects of practice that they don't agree with. So Wang Dongting, one of his ideas is that the body itself isn't where the original energy that comes from the Tao takes place, right? So it's called the Xiantian Yi Qi, the pre-heaven one energy, or the pre-heaven one Qi, isn't located in the body, according to him. Now, this is not a new idea at all. While I was doing my homework to be able to give this video, I looked into some of the background material that he has quoted in his document, and one of the thinkers was writing about this concept all the way back in like 1000 AD. So it's been an idea in Taoism for a long time. People in the scholarly community often attribute this to sort of a later thing that happened, from maybe like the 14 or 1500s forward. But you can find these influences because they're Buddhist influences in the internal alchemy school that go all the way back to 1,000 years ago. And so this idea in Taoism is particularly important. It's a very heavily internal alchemy influenced doctrine, but the body is viewed as being essentially a yin shell. And so there's no part of the body which is yang in nature, or maybe there's only a very small amount of the body that's yang in nature. So for instance, some schools have thought, or at least one or two, make the argument that the eyes are the only yang organ of the body. But, this is something that perhaps others would dispute and say, no, there's no yang organ of the body in terms of the pre-heaven energy of the body, right? It's all post-heaven, or in other words, it's all something that happens after you're born. And the part that was developing originally, it's still suffused by the energy of your parents' genetic material. It's still suffused by the Tao, and so that's the real body. And so Wang comes to the conclusion then that you wouldn't be able to get the true original pre-heaven energy, or the true original energy that you need to cultivate the Tao from inside the body. It would have to come from outside, and the space around the body is empty. Now, let's make a distinction here. Emptiness doesn't mean completely devoid of matter, right? There's no idea of a vacuum in Taoism. Empty means that it's not the same kind of degree of physicality as the human body. And so, or, other things like, let's say, the desk I'm sitting at. So in the Tao Te Ching, it talks about things which are very subtle, things which are very minute, and things which are, so flat as to be impossible to see. And so this is kind of the idea of what emptiness is there's something going on there. There's always movement going on there, but that movement is imperceptible by us, right? And so whereas many other internal alchemy schools would say, well, you should practice focusing on the abdomen area because you have a certain amount of sort of ancestral energy that's located in that space. Wang Dongting, who originally advocated that view, and in my opinion, if you look, contextually at the text, he doesn't leave that view behind, but he says this is a perspective that can be given to higher level students who've already attained basic level of skill, right? The chuji, ji chu, right? The let's say or what's he called it? He calls it lianji chuji, right? So refining the let's say the mind, I guess. But what it really means is you refine the basic skills of internal alchemy and get this process started. And then once it's started, then you can use this other method. That my conceit is that's what he says in the document. That you can read it for yourself because I've put it up on my Substack, so I'll link to that too. And of course, it has a couple of mistakes in it because I translated over the course of like 2 hours and didn't edit it. But again, this guy who practices Neidan, no, not a professional translator. So in any event, right? His idea is that because the body doesn't have this substance, or doesn't have this, pre-heaven stuff, then it has to be found outside the body. So he incorporates the idea of my home and the other home, right? This is an old idea that goes back to the very first Chinese alchemy document, Zhou Yi Can Tong Qi. But it's also talked about in other approaches, like in the Southern School by Zhang Boduan, and earlier teachers like Lu Xixing. And so this idea of my home and the other home, it can have different interpretations, but the basic idea is that I have something, and then something else also has something that I need in order to generate the alchemical medicine. So sometimes this is viewed as a sexual part of practice, right? Or even a coupled part of practice, right? So the couple practices together, and each party is able to take some of the other's energy and convert it, and that's how they get the process of generating the energy going. Another approach could be even that your mind is like, your intention is one half of the equation, and the essence which is contained in your body is the other half of the equation. And so the yin aspect of your mind has to nestle with the yang aspect of your energy in order to generate the energy. That could also be considered as my home and the other home. Or it could be, in the case of Wang Dongting, that my home is my awareness or myself, and then the other home is the space outside of my body where the pre-heaven emptiness is located. So if I put my mind a little bit outside of my body, then I can borrow that emptiness and that energy, and it will come into me, and then it will trigger the alchemical response, right? That's his basic idea in the document. So basically what he thinks will happen if you do it is, he says, number one, this is something that has to be taught by mouth, right? You can't really learn it by reading the document. Somebody has to show you how to do it. I'm not going to show you how to do it in this video because it's a little bit dangerous. If you want to start with a method, I would start with a lower Dantian method because it's much safer. But again, I think that, Let's give people their credit. There are some schools that start from the space between the eyes. It's just that it's slightly more risky. That's it. So generally, though, he thinks that you place your attention a little bit in front of your face, and then you would allow your mind, to congeal with that empty space and become quiet and become still, and then gradually forget yourself, forget your body, right? Enter into a profound state of meditative silence where there's nothing happening. And this tracks with other internal alchemy styles. You put your attention in your dantian, you do the same thing, right? You put your attention in your upper back, you do the same thing. But then when you get into that deep meditation state, what happens is that at a certain point, when you become completely yin in nature, in other words, you've completely forgotten yourself, there's nothing going on, it's completely still, then the yang energy will move spontaneously, and it will come into your head, and it will generate pre-heaven energy in your head. And then, he doesn't talk a lot about the expected outcomes of practice. What he actually says is, here's the theory behind the practice from the Tao, and then here's how the Tao generates reality from emptiness and from nothingness. And then here's how this ultimately reflects on human life, because human life obviously is material and is bound to this post-heaven way of being. And here's how to fix that by keeping your attention in emptiness and then reverting back to emptiness. And then that will generate a certain kind of energy inside of you that can convert the nature of the body to go from a yin body to a yang body. So this is, even though it takes a Buddhist idea of this rotten flesh sack, it elaborates it into a Taoist idea where the body can be converted into being positive in nature, into being yang in nature, by borrowing the energy from nature, bringing it back to ourselves, and knowing how to cultivate it in the body. And then so he said, there's a long quote at the end of the text where he says, this can be used to, well, it's actually somebody else who says it, but this can be used to foster certain kinds of skills like turtleback breathing, or the energy rising up from the tailbone, and so on and so forth, right? So he's pretty obviously saying, this is just how we get the chi from nature to come into the body. He's not saying that, you have to completely disassociate from the body forever. Instead, the idea is that we get the positive energy and we change the nature of the body. That's what Neidan practice is about. It's about positive transformation by using pre-heaven energy. Or the energy that is postulated to have existed before we were born. So that's one big thing. Another big thing is he borrows a lot from the theory of from Xingming Guizhi, a very popular middle school Neidan book. And it talks about something called the pre-heaven of the pre-heaven. So normally in Taoist practice, or I should say Neidan practice, people talk about the pre-heaven, right? That's like the how the body was generated through the sexual intercourse of two parents, and then how it was raised in the womb as a fetus before it was born. So all of those things are considered to be very constructive. The body's undergoing a lot of changes, and gradually we transform into somebody who's capable of being born into the world and having autonomy and doing all those wonderful things that people do. Whereas the post-heaven, of course, is everything that we do after we're born that ultimately leads to us becoming, gradually hurt over time, and then eventually our demise. On the other hand, so normally in Neidan practice, people think of the pre-heaven as being like, this pre-heaven Jing essence is contained in the lower abdomen, and it can be transformed into chi, and then it can be returned to the area behind the belly button. And then when you keep your mind there for long enough in the right conditions, then the chi and the essence and the spirit awareness all come together, and they form one cohesive energy, and that opens up this whole other avenue for practice where all the meridians open up and stuff like that, right? That's the basic Neidan idea. In Xingming Guizhi, they say you have to go one step further than this. There's a state before the pre-heaven. They call it the pre-heaven of the pre-heaven, right? So it's before the actual gestative state even began. And so in that context, there is no body, right? The body is the nature of the universe, and the life energy is the use of the universe, if you're familiar with those two ideas, Ti and Yong, right, from Confucianism. So that concept is what Wang Dongting borrows from. So he's saying, really, you have to go to the time before you had a body to practice. And he's pretty adamant, that the body is this yin shell and so on. But again, from other people in Taoism much, much before him. But the basic doctrine he uses isn't different from other Neidan people. Huang Yuanji uses this in his middle school. He just achieves this by focusing on the lower dantian and forgetting the self, right? other people focus on the upper back and forget about the self, right? There's plenty of ways to practice this approach properly. So it's not completely revolutionary at all, or not even slightly revolutionary. It's just pretty typical Neidan stuff. And Wang Dongting, he believes through his own practice and through reading that he's found a good way to practice or a better way to practice. So he promotes that, right? That's what everybody in the entire history of Neidan has done who's written a document. And so in that context, right, that's the basic idea of how he thinks you should practice. But we have to ask ourselves an important question, right? Because sometimes people will read these documents, or they'll read a certain tradition of documents, right? Like, let's say that normally we think of the Western school, the Eastern school, and the Jiangsanfeng school as being like a package in Neidan studies. So typically people think of Lu Xixing, the founder of the Western school, being variously influenced by various different Neidan authors and perhaps other things too. And then Li Hanshu, right, the founder of the Western school, being influenced by Lu Xixing and very strongly influenced by the writings of Jiang Sanfeng. And putting all these things together in sort of one package, we can say these three schools are broadly a little bit similar. Sure, it's not wrong, but then we can also hazard the possibility of not looking broadly enough at other Neidan documents to find things which might also be similar, or to find things which are contradictory. So this can be a major problem in our interpretation. And so if you were to say, well, Wang Dongting's idea of focusing outside of the body in front of the face is completely unique, and this started a whole new line of inquiry in Neidan, it's a completely novel approach. No, it's completely not true. People have focused outside of the body in Neidan for long before Wang Dongting. And this is just a very common practice, actually. It's essential to Neidan practice. And people who are not associated with him after him also did such practices. So what I'd like to do is compare and contrast a few examples of such practices. So number one, I think the most important place that we can start is between the eyes. So this idea of keeping the attention in front of the eyes is pretty unique to Wang Dongting. There's not a ton of other people in the Neidan tradition that do that, but certainly people that keep the attention between the eyes or on the nose are many, and there are some also who keep the attention, both in front of the face and behind the eyes at the same time. So let me give a few really brief examples. Now, this is by no means exhaustive or even chronological to any great extent, but the text Xingming Guizhi is a great example of a sort of middle period Neidan text, where the opening technique is placing the attention between the eyes and then meditating there and becoming very peaceful. They postulate that if a person is especially talented, they can practice there, and what will ultimately happen is the pre-heaven yang energy will come, and it will cause qi to go to all three dantians and open all the meridians, and they don't have to do any other practice. But Xingming Guizhi also makes the assertion that there are many people for whom that's not appropriate, so then they should focus between the eyes first, and then later on they can put their attention in their upper back, right? If you want to learn it, you have to read Xingming Guizhi and have somebody teach it to you. This isn't a lesson here. I'm just telling you about what they think about practice. And so Xingming Guizhi has this very sort of elaborated understanding of how this works. It ultimately results in embryonic breathing in the lower dantian, which is what every Neidan style results in if you follow it for long enough, which is a stage, and then it leads to the eventual creation of the so-called yang spirit, which then can, live outside the body, right? So that's one example of keeping the attention between the eyes. But Xingming Guizhi also has an interesting series of documents called the various different kinds of Chan Tu, right? Chan images. So one is called Xing Chan Tu, the walking Chan or walking Dhyana image. One is called I think it's called Jan Chan Tu, so the standing Dhyana image. Another is called Zuo Chan Tu, the sitting Dhyana image, and the third is called Wo Chan Tu, the lying Dhyana image. And so these are modes of meditation that you can use for walking, standing, sitting, and lying down, right? The four major attitudes of meditation. And so in both the walking Chan and the standing Chan, there are discussions about the awareness being outside of the body during meditation. So here's how they work. For the walking Chan image, the eyes are kept level and sort of looking forward and a little bit downward and not being drawn to outer phenomenon. So the eyes are relaxed and open and neutral. And so that causes the field of the vision to expand and to open up and not to be focused, right? So if you think about Ian McGilchrist, who writes about who wrote the book The Master and His Emissary, talks about the brain being divided into two hemispheric regions, right? The left and the right, and these things are responsible for different activities. But another thing that I think he talks about is the idea that different types of animals have eyes in different positions on their head, and certainly, Terence McKenna, who's I think a much more outre and strange thinker, but he also talks about this idea. Animals which are predatory in nature, their eyes tend to be more on the front of their head so that they can take a clear view of the thing that they're stalking and chasing and eating, right? But animals which are prey in nature tend to have eyes on the sides of their head, right? And so that's able to give them a wider field of vision so that they can see, a python sneaking or a tiger sneaking up on them, right? And so for humans, it's interesting because we are, partially a predatory animal, but we're also a prey animal. And I'm not saying this, I don't know how this factors into the evolutionary stuff. I'm just using, those thinkers as a way to get to this thought. We have ranges of vision which are very focused, and we also have a range of vision which is generalized. So if you meditate and you keep a general awareness of the space around you, your mind becomes very calm and very clear, right? You're able to take in the information without attaching it to too much or attaching it to it too much, right? Whereas if you're very focused, you're really focused on one thing, and that's like an objective. So the idea of this walking Chan is that when you relax your vision, then it calms your mind naturally. And so when you're walking, you take account of that. And there's other parts of this idea too, but basically you enter into a very soft meditative state, and then the energy starts to come naturally. Now, does the energy come in from your head? I don't know, maybe. But the key point is that there's a relationship between you and the outside world when you practice. And if you get to a certain level of Neidan, you have to have this, right? So this is why martial artists sometimes talk about being able to cultivate the golden elixir. Actually, it's because they already meditate, and so they already have the energy. And when they practice martial arts, they can do it in such a way that the energy will come to them. So that's one instance of being able to integrate with the outside environment and get the energy from Xingming Guizhi. Another one is the standing dhyana image. So the standing dhyana image, basically it says you stand and you can keep your hands over your umbilicus and you close your eyes and meditate on the emptiness around your body, right? So the emptiness in the entire space around your body becomes your point of meditation, because it's not that easy to focus on the lower dantian when you're standing, right? At least standing in this form of meditation, it's easier to be aware of the space around your body. And when you dissolve into it, it will attract the energy to you, right? Because there's an old Taoist oral saying, which is "Xian Tian Yi Qi Zi Shu Zhong Lai," right? The pre-heaven one qi comes from the center of void non-being or void emptiness. And so the idea here is you can take the energy from outside. So this is a very well understood idea. Again, in Xingming Guizhi, they talk about the yang shen, or the ultimate result of meditation, as this kind of yang qi infused spiritual awareness that's able to leave the body and be outside the body, and that can merge with nature. So that's also the awareness being in the outside environment is just at a higher level. It's not at the beginning like these other techniques that we're talking about. So there's 3 examples from Xingming Guizhi. How about let's say a more recent school of Neidan, so after Wang Dongting? Chen Yingning was a contemporary of Wang Dongting. He's a little bit younger than him, but he lived in the 19th century until, and into the 20th century until 1969. And he created the Immortality Study School of Internal Alchemy. His disciple, Hu Haya, talked about, he said, if you would like to practice in the space between the eyes, it's probably better to keep a generalized awareness where the attention is not entirely inside the head, but it's also not entirely outside the head. So it's sort of partway between the inside and the outside. And it's just generally a very relaxed awareness of the space sort of around the space between your eyes. So, I take that to mean like maybe an amorphous sort of like softball sized space of generalized awareness in that area. He said that focusing too strongly between the eyes is not very healthy, or it can lead to health problems. And so it's better perhaps to use that type of approach. So that's one approach where, again, the empty space outside the body is able to be integrated with the space inside the body. And that's similar to Dongting's approach, or maybe even influenced by him, but it's, again, still a little bit different, right? Another one proposed by Hu Haya and Chen Yingning is called Ting Fu Fa, so the method of listening to the skin. I did a really cool little course about these methods of skin listening and this kind of stuff, which I will also link to in the description here, in case you're interested in that. But this Ting Fu Fa method basically is that when you breathe, you imagine that the breath is emerging from the hair follicles on the entire surface of the body, and then also entering back into them on the inhalation and exhalation. And so that method of practice, again, is integrating the area around the body with the area inside of the body, because you're imagining this opening and closing of the body with the qi. And so that's also a beginner level technique, and that also directly implies the use of the emptiness around the body to practice. Not only that, but that practice it's even, really ancient, right? So some people argue that that comes from Zhuangzi, from the second chapter of Zhuangzi, where the recluse Nanguo Ziqi is sitting in meditation, and he talks about perceiving all of the different orifices of the world around him, right? Some people argue that that was a meditation technique where he could bring in the energy from the outside environment and send out his energy back into the environment. Now, that may be a bit of an anachronistic argument. I don't know, but it's certainly worth considering. But another place where that practice is also present is in the Tiantai school of Buddhism. So the monk Zhi Yi advocated that people can do this kind of breathing of paying attention to the surface of the skin when they breathe. And so this is a very, very old technique. It's certainly, maybe thousands of years older than Wang Dongting. And so in that regard, Wang Dongting's specific method of keeping the attention in front of the eyes may be a little bit special, but the overall concept of using the area outside of the body as a medium for attracting energy in Neidan is not new at all. Another really interesting method is Baiyu Chan's Xingyi Liaofa, so the medicine practice healing technique. He imagines the space above the top of the head, and that attracts the qi from there. That one's, they say, is only for people who have achieved a certain level of practice. But if you've achieved embryonic breathing already, that's a great, great, great text that you could read, and it can be very, very helpful in practice. So all of these different schools, a lot of them have techniques that use the space outside of the body. Not to mention things like sexual, internal alchemy, where the two partners actually use each other's, physical materials to be able to generate the elixir, right? So this is not a particularly revolutionary idea that Wang Dongting is talking about, but it is a really essential idea inside of internal alchemy practice. And not only that, but at different stages in practice, you can put the mind in different places and it has different benefits, right? So when we're making an analysis of these documents, especially now let's talk about modern Qigong, right? When we talk about modern Qigong and we say, well, Pang is using movement to send the energy out of the body and to bring it back in, or whoever, right? There's more than one person that does this. I happen to practice Zhineng Qigong, so that's why I talk about it more. But, when we look at that as a perspective in modern Qigong, it's not exactly the same as internal alchemy practice, but certainly it's influenced by it. And there's a whole broad range of texts in the textual tradition that we can go back and look at, and not to mention texts outside of the internal alchemy tradition where deities are placed above the head or between the eyes and so on, right? This is something that's been going on for a long time in Taoism. They've had the idea that you can bring the energy in from outside since before internal alchemy existed, right? Even things like imagining mountains and streams and the sunrise, or meditating under the full moon, right? All of these are exactly the same trajectory of idea which developed over thousands of years. And so I think it's really, it really behooves us to put special attention on not getting stuck within specific documents or even specific genres of practice. it's really good to get one genre from a teacher, but it's like if you were playing music, um, there's a bunch of different attitudes in jazz, right? So you could, sorry, I'm learning jazz right now, so this is maybe why this comes up. But there's a bunch of different attitudes in jazz, right? So you could take on, um, let's say, I don't know, like a calypsonian attitude, and you could play a song like, St. Thomas, right? Ba-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. But then there's other songs like, The Falling Leaves, which are like ballads, right? And then there's other songs which, there's like fusion elements with rock and stuff like that. It's all jazz. So you could say internal alchemy is a similar idea. It takes on elements from Buddhism, or it takes on elements from Confucianism, or it takes on elements from Taoism, or different kinds of older Taoism. Would be like different attitudes in jazz, for instance. Or you could say that blues is another genre of music, right? So Taoist visualization practices, or Taoian, and the list goes on, right? There's all these different sort of approaches to practice, styles of practice, and attitudes to practice. And as a person who is interested in studying these things, if you are, I mean, if you just want to follow, like one teacher and go as far as you can with that teacher, that's also a perfectly reasonable way of practicing. But if you're interested in, really understanding them on a level where they can be in you rather than being intellectual, right? Then you need to go and make an exhaustive research of the genre. Now that takes at least a decade. Okay. If you have a good teacher, if they show you how to practice properly in one style, doing more research about it is going to take at least a decade, if not longer. Um, if it might not be worth it to you. But on the other hand, I think it's very, very important to be really as broad sighted as possible about these things, because otherwise what happens is that people end up in silos, and they end up in, lineage think, right? And that's only really helpful for the perpetuation of a lineage view. Now, internal alchemy doesn't have lineages, but I'm just saying in general that this is sort of how people tend to think sometimes, is that they get really dedicated to the idea, I do Western school internal alchemy, and I'm really into the Wang Dongting thing, and I'm gonna do that to the exclusion of other things, or I'm gonna think like Wang Dongting might have thought, right? Oh, other people don't get it; they think it's in the body. I know that it's really an emptiness, so this is the way to do it. It might be better to consider that there's all these different ways to be successful. People have experimented with them. They make themselves and their own students into guinea pigs, and when they find a good method, then they pass it on. Right? That's how I think really actually the history of this thing probably actually worked. And so then when you want to inform yourself about the bigger world of Qigong and these things like that, then you can use this as your informant, right? This broader understanding, because modern Qigong, most of the people who created those modern systems we like, Jing Gong, Wild Goose Qigong, Xianggong, right? Whichever ones, there's so many of them. A lot of them were experts in like Taoist and Buddhist and Chinese medicine literature. And they blended these things and made these really cool practices. And you could do it too if you understand enough about the genre. And then that means that you can change your approach to practice based on the things that you understand that you need, and you could leave out things that you don't need. And if you're a teacher, then this is just really invaluable stuff, right? So I think that, ultimately anyway, I should probably get off my soapbox here, but I wanted to give that sort of introduction to Wang Dongting's thought in this document, which is an addendum sort of to the rest of his practice, and then also compare and contrast it against other Neidan documents which do similar things, in order to illustrate the general character of internal alchemy practice insofar as this energy outside the body is concerned. Maybe next time we'll look at another document and talk about energy inside the body, because that's a pretty interesting idea too. But for the time being, check out the stuff I put in the introduction, whatever it's called. What the heck is that called? I got to do like a bloopers reel or something here. Description. Yeah, have a look at the description, and like and subscribe to the channel, and I will keep making videos of various kinds for you. See ya.